So if you find this helpful or interesting, then give it a thumbs up, leave any comments that you've got below, and if you aren't already, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you can receive notifications of when future sleep stories go live. I have dozens and dozens of stories already on my channel that you can go and search. I also release new stories every single week. Okay, so as you listen to this relaxing sleep story, you can just take a moment to close your eyes. Allow yourself to get comfortable and begin to drift off asleep. And I don't know whether you'll drift off asleep faster with the sound of my voice or the spaces between my words. And as you comfortably fall asleep, so I'll just tell this story in the background. And this story is about a mouse called Claus. And this mouse called Claus is scurrying around one Christmas Eve. And this mouse scurries around pretty much every single night. And this Christmas Eve, this mouse scurries around and notices that there's a saucer with some food on it. And the mouse thinks that this is unusual, because normally there's no food left out, and Claus has to go exploring to try and find the food. And so Claus goes over to that food, takes some of that food, holds it in his front paws, and nibbles away at that food, and then sees that there's a glass of milk, and so drinks some of that milk, feeling that that helps the food go down. And on this Christmas Eve, everyone in this house has already gone to bed. The lights are all out. And Claus goes over and turns on the Christmas lights. He stands on the switch, and the Christmas lights come on the tree. And Claus steps back, looking up at that Christmas tree, almost mesmerized by those lights as they twinkle on that green tree. And Claus can smell the smell of that tree, that pine smell. And a fake fire has been left on in the living room that looks almost like real flames. It gives off warmth, but in reality it's just an image on a screen. And Claus quite likes these nights where he has free reign of a house. He comes out from his home, he wanders around, he plays with things, he gets some food, he enjoys his night before the people in this home wake up in the morning. And Claus can hear some bell sounds in the background, and climbs up onto the windowsill, puts his paws up on the window, puts his nose to the window and looks outside. And you can see the street lights outside, snow outside.
can notice how calm and quiet everything looks outside. And then he hears a thud, and following the thud, he notices some sparkling and twinkling lights appearing in mid-air, and then what looks almost like a swirl of smoke. And suddenly Santa appears there. And Klaus assumed, like the people in this house assumed, that Santa isn't real. That all the presents under the tree are placed there by the parents, and some of the presents are placed by the kids, but none of the presents are placed by Santa. And yet here is this man in red suddenly appearing in this room with a sack on his back. And he takes that sack off his back, plops it down beside him. He takes some presents out, places them under the tree. He has a sip of the milk, eats some of the food, and picks the sack up again. And as that smoky effect begins again, and the sparkling lights begin again, Klaus bounds across the room and jumps up and grabs the sack. The next minute Klaus finds himself on the roof, clinging onto the sack, as the sack is placed among other sacks in the back of a sleigh. And Klaus thinks to himself that this sleigh seems unusual, that the space behind Santa is actually only a reasonably small space. And yet these sacks that are placed into this space actually end up in a vast, cavernous space. And Santa then can be heard to encourage the reindeer to get moving, and then launches off that roof with incredible speed. And almost instantaneously is on another roof in another row of houses. And Klaus is curious how Santa delivers these presents. So he crawls up that sack as Santa's pulling it out of the back of the sleigh. And he jumps down onto the sleigh itself, hides out of Santa's view, watches Santa get off that sleigh. And Santa's got a huge sack on his back. And then Klaus watches Santa run along to the first chimney. He touches that chimney, and in a puff of swirling smoke he disappears. And then almost instantaneously he's back again. And then he seems to free run across the rooftops, running along, touching the chimney as he zaps himself down into the building, and then appears back again, before bounding along the rooftops further, doing the same again and again at every single property, running with incredible speed, almost like a blur between points where he stops at the chimneys. And then with the last house in the street, when he reappears, almost like a blur, he flashes along the rooftops, back to the sleigh, drops the bag, drops the sack back in the back of the sleigh, before the sleigh launches and moves onto the next row of houses. And even at this speed, Claus thinks there's no way that Santa can deliver to every single house in one night. And Claus watches as Santa repeats this over and over again, property after property, rows of houses after rows of houses. And Claus thinks to themselves that this is really taking a long time, even at this speed. That many hours have passed, and Santa hasn't even left this country yet. Then after many hours, Santa's sleigh and the reindeer rise up higher in the air, and then accelerate rapidly, arriving in another country just in moments. And Claus hung on expecting to be thrown off with that acceleration, and yet felt nothing, almost like they may as well have just been stationary. And so in the new country, Claus gazed over the side as the sleigh landed on the first roof, and could see there were still some people milling around, that over here some people in this location hadn't yet gone into their homes. But Claus then, on first glance, didn't notice, but on second glance, realized that nobody seems to be moving. And Claus watched very closely. And there was someone walking down the street, carrying a warm drink. And there was steam rising up from that warm drink. And Claus noticed that actually that steam is moving, and that the people are moving, but they're doing so incredibly slowly, that somehow time has been slowed down to almost a standstill. And Claus realized how Santa manages to deliver everything in one night, that somehow Santa can slow time right down. And so although Santa's travelling incredibly fast as well, just travelling fast isn't enough to deliver to every single property. Time has to be slowed down as well. And for what to Claus seemed like hours and hours and hours, was actually passing in a very short space of time. And Santa got to the end of his deliveries, and then headed home, back towards the snowy poles. And back at home, that's when Santa noticed he'd got a stowaway in the sleigh. And he sat down and he looked over at Claus, and Claus nervously looked back, and Santa, in a deep voice, asked Claus where he came from, and what he's doing here, and explained he'll need to go home, because here isn't necessarily suitable for a mouse. It's very cold. And Claus was a curious mouse, and explained that he was curious. He was interested by how much space there seemed to be in the sleigh. That there seems to be just the tiniest of spaces, big enough for a sack of presents for just a handful of houses. And yet the space is cavernous when you enter it, almost like it's much, much bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And there seems to be a mechanism that seems to make sure that the right sacks get in Santa's reach at the right times, so that Santa can just reach behind him, take the sack that he needs, and then go and do his deliveries, come back, and once the sack is empty, just drop that sack into the cavernous space, and the next sack in reach will be the right sack for the next deliveries. And Claus was curious about this. How did it work? How did Santa design, or who designed, some kind of flying machine that's pulled by magical reindeer, that has more space on the inside than the outside? And Santa explained that it's kind of an illusion, that in reality there's barely any space that's there. But Santa explained that the way the sleigh has been designed is that that space is actually a portal, that what you pass through and what Santa reaches into isn't reaching into the space behind Santa's seat. It's reaching through a portal into Santa's warehouse, and that all the presents get prepared. They all get put in their relevant locations in the warehouse, attached to the mechanisms that move each bag, one at a time as needed, up to the portal. And that the portal's just opened when Santa sets off, and one end of the portal is in the warehouse, the other end of the portal is on Santa's sleigh. And so he reaches through the portal and just takes the next bag. And Claus was curious about why time seems to have ran so slowly. And Santa said that many centuries ago he arrived on Earth, and he noticed so much poverty, so many people struggling, and he tried to use his advanced technology to help people of Earth. But trying to help looking like a very different being just seemed to scare people. And he realised that people were less afraid of someone that looked like a friendly older man, and that with their technology they've been able to, as alien species, traverse the stars, because they're able to slow time right down, so that reality passes incredibly slowly. And they've got advanced technology so they can move pretty quickly. They can warp space and time as they move, so that technically the sleigh never moves anywhere. Space and time moves around the sleigh. And that's why there's no jolt of acceleration. And that by remaining in the suit that they're wearing, that's holographically made to look like Santa, with an advanced form of hologram that's tactile as well as visual, they age at this slow rate as well. So everything they do is at this slow rate all the time. And that the space between one Christmas and the next just seems to take so long, giving plenty of time to source all the presents, to wrap all the presents, and that there are many of these aliens here. They go and do all the deliveries, but there are others who work preparing and wrapping things, that actually Santa is just the deliveryman, a bit like a typical post person, that they've been interested in how different myths have built up about them around the world, that often place them as being the one in charge, with all their helpers doing all the preparation, when the reality is that they're not the one in charge. Their job is the delivery person. And others' job is to prepare and source products. Others' job is to wrap products. Others' job is to make sure they're in the right sacks. Others' job is to make sure those sacks are in the right place. So everyone has a job. And as time is slowed down, even though they're able to move as if they're moving in real time and everything else is slow, they can move really fast, but internally they're no different to the rest of the time, that they age incredibly slowly, matching the world around them that's created by their technology. And Claus finds this incredibly fascinating and wants to go and explore, wants to check out the different warehouses, check out the process of how it's all done. And Santa explained that their role is to try to bring happiness and joy to people. That they can't just reveal themselves and say we're an alien race with advanced technology, because humanity hasn't quite reached that point yet. That some would love aliens to reveal themselves, but their technology is too advanced to be able to be understood and handled by all these people. That they're able to use their technology to communicate with different animals on different planets, whether it's humans or mice or any other kind of animal. And that they've got this technology for creating portals, for creating warp drives, but they couldn't just give this technology away because it would be too advanced to be received. But once humanity on this planet have caught up and are approaching the level of technology where the leap wouldn't be so great, then they can reveal themselves and see how they can help humanity. But in the meantime, they just do their bit to try to help humanity to feel good, to appreciate each other, to continue on this growth they've been doing for the last few thousand years. They explained how they've seen humanity go from enjoying barbaric practices, not really recognizing that people have feelings, not really treating humans as human. And gradually this has improved, and people have recognized that if something feels bad to them, it probably feels bad to others. And now they're at the point where humanity has pretty much stopped keeping people as property, pretty much stopped wanting to go and enjoy public displays of harm to others, and starting to focus on their role within the wider world and how to treat all things with respect and kindness. And yet there's still some way to go, but they're well on their way. And Santa said they just need a bit of extra encouragement, some feel-good things, not expensive gifts, but gifts that just make them feel special, make them feel like those around them understand them. So where they can, they give these gifts. And Santa said that he's going to get Claus back home. And Claus thought he was going to get another ride on a sleigh with those reindeer. But Santa said there's no need. We can create portals to anywhere. And he creates a portal to the living room that Claus came from. Claus walks through that portal saying goodbye to Santa, walks out into that living room, turns off those Christmas lights, and thinks to himself that no one would believe him if he tried to tell anyone the story of his experience. He goes back into his home and settles down for the night. And on waking on Christmas morning, he finds a little stocking at the end of his bed with a small lump of cheese and a note from Santa saying, "A gift from me to you. Merry Christmas." And the mouse looks out of his home, out into that room, and sees a family sitting around excitedly opening their presents, thanking each other, enjoying each other's company. And he begins to understand what Santa is trying to do. And that night, feeling good and relaxed, the mouse drifts and floats asleep. And as you drift comfortably asleep, so I'll just tell this story in the background. And as I tell this story, I don't know whether you'll drift deeper asleep to the sound of my voice, or whether it'll be to the spaces between my words. And one day, there was a family preparing for Christmas, and the children always looked forward to Christmas. They enjoyed giving people presents, seeing people made happy as they opened those presents. They enjoyed getting to spend time together during the holiday season, playing games. And their Christmas day begins the night before. And the night before Christmas, the children are excitable. They want Christmas Day to already be here. And these children still believe in Santa Claus. And so the night before Christmas, they want to go to bed so that they can catch Santa Claus delivering the presents during the night. And as the evening progresses, so the parents turn off the lights, turn on the Christmas tree lights. The fire warming the room, flames flickering away, the crackling sound of that fire. The light from the fire glistening off decorations around the room. Christmas cards on the shelves, and on top of the fireplace, presents under the tree. And together they all sit down. They watch some Christmas TV, some feel-good TV. Before bedtime approaches, and the children go up to their rooms, parents go up to read to them. And the children get into bed, relax in bed, feeling so warm, snuggled, comfortable, as the parents read to their children. And while they read a bedtime story, so the children drift and float asleep. And the children have this plan that they'll wake up a little bit later in the night to try and catch Santa Claus delivering the presents. And they know that there are many presents that are already under the tree, that are presents from their parents. But Santa delivers a stocking of presents for each child, and they want to catch Santa doing so. And so the children wake up during the night, sneak downstairs with all the lights in the house off. They hide behind the sofa and excitedly they wait, because they want to catch Santa delivering those stockings. And as they wait, so they still feel tired, and they feel their eyes occasionally shutting, and then they bring themselves back to alertness, and then notice their eyes shutting again. And it's almost as if the harder they try to stay awake, the more asleep they feel. And they try really hard to stay awake, but keep noticing themselves nodding off. And then, after what feels like hours and hours of waiting, they hear the sound of sleigh bells in the distance. They hear some sounds coming from above them, possibly on the roof of the house. And they hide and wait. And then they hear a sound in the living room, and they peek out from the sides of the sofa, and they look over, and they see what looks like Santa Claus hanging some stockings up by the fireplace. And then they notice that Santa Claus is turning around. So they move themselves back behind the sofa out of sight and wait just a moment to give Santa time to finish turning around. And to hopefully turn back or face another direction. And after a few moments, they peer out from behind the sofa and are surprised to find that Santa seems to have vanished. And they go over by the fireplace. They see that the mince pie they'd left out has gone. The glass of milk they'd left out has been drunk. And they feel so excited that they've seen Santa. And they head back up to bed, knowing in the morning they've got their presents to unwrap, and these presents in the stockings from Santa. And they drift off asleep, sleeping soundly, so rested. That evening, after the children went to bed, so the parents began to prepare for the night and prepare for Christmas Day. The mum helped the dad get into a Santa costume. They made sure the stockings had all the presents in them that Santa was going to give to the children. They knew that the children were going to try and spy Santa visiting and delivering the presents. The children would often talk to each other, having secret conversations, completely unaware that they could be overheard by their parents. And then the mum went upstairs to the bedroom, and the dad sat reading in the kitchen, just waiting for the children to awaken. And then after a little while, the dad heard the children coming back downstairs again. He turned off the kitchen light, picked up the stockings, stood up and waited out of view. He could hear the children come into the lounge. He could hear them scurrying behind the sofa. He knew that his wife would have noticed them leave their room upstairs, and he just had to wait for her cue. And so he waited and waited, and after a few moments, he could hear the sound of sleigh bells, sounds of hooves, as if there were noises on the roof, which actually was the mum playing some noises on the stereo in the bedroom. And then after a little while, the noises stop, and the father dashes in to the living room, just in time for those children to poke their heads out and see him hanging up the stockings and drinking the milk, eating the mince pie. And then he starts turning towards the sofa and sees their heads pop behind the sofa. And as soon as their heads have popped behind the sofa, he dashes out of the living room back into the kitchen and hides again. Until he hears the children come out from behind the sofa, explore the living room, notice the milk and the mince pie have gone, and then he hears them heading up to bed again. And after they've headed up to bed, he starts changing out of that Santa costume to go to bed himself. And after he's changed out of the Santa costume, he heads up to bed. His wife asks how it went. He explains that it went perfectly, that the children seemed to be convinced they'd just seen Santa place the stockings in the living room. And then they drifted and floated relaxed asleep. And the next morning the children were up really early, coming in their parents' bedroom, awakening their parents. And then they all headed downstairs. The parents made breakfast for the children, and all sitting around in dressing gowns, making the living room cosy, comfortable, giving a real nice atmosphere to the living room. They sat down on the floor, and they passed around the presents, and the children were excited to see their siblings opening the presents, were excited to see their parents opening presents. And the parents were excited to see the children opening presents. And the children took the presents out of the stockings, and they spent the morning playing with presents as the parents began to prepare for a Christmas dinner. And the Christmas dinner wasn't for many hours yet, but there was a lot of preparation required. So while the children enjoyed playing with each other, the parents got on with preparing food, making the dining room look nice, ready for having a family Christmas meal later in the afternoon. And the children turned the TV on and they watched Christmas morning films, cartoons. And the parents discussed what it was like when they were young, that enjoyment of being able to just wake up on Christmas morning, play with your toys, watch some telly, and just have such a relaxing time of it, spending time playing with your parents, other relatives. And if the weather's suitable, going for a nice walk in the afternoon. And they discussed how as parents, once you're an adult, things change a little. Suddenly you spend Christmas working, preparing food, having to wash up after the meal, just looking forward to an opportunity to have a nap, and that you still might enjoy Christmas Day. But what you do during Christmas Day is different to when you were younger. And after midday, family members started arriving. Some uncles and aunts and cousins. Grandparents. And they all hugged the children, hugged each other, seemed so pleased to see each other. They engaged in playing with the children. And then mid-afternoon, the parents had prepared the food, laid the table, placed all the food on the table, and called everyone through for Christmas dinner. And they always had Christmas dinner late afternoon. And during Christmas dinner, they enjoyed the meal, they enjoyed good conversation with each other, the smells of the food. They enjoyed the pudding. They always felt that they'd probably overindulged during Christmas meals. They talked and caught up about how life has been going, what's been happening since they last saw each other. And then after the main meal and just before dessert, they all picked up a cracker each, reached across each other, and all simultaneously around the table pulled the crackers, took out a little gift from the cracker, took out the foil crown, placed that on their heads, and took out the joke. And they could smell across the table the smell from each of the pulled crackers. And they took it in turns to read out the joke to each other, and each joke was a really cheesy joke. And they laughed or groaned as each person told their joke. And then dessert was brought out, and they enjoyed the dessert. And after dessert, the parents and a couple of the other adults did the washing up, tidying up, drying up, just chatting and enjoying conversation while they did so. While a couple of the other adults spent time with the children, or just sat watching the TV, letting their food go down. And after everything was cleared up, they all had a round of drinks before dressing for the cold weather, and outside was cold and crisp, with the most beautiful layer of snow. And near their house, down a footpath, was some woodland and a lake. And so all together they left the house late afternoon to go for a late afternoon walk after all the food they'd eaten. And they could feel that fresh, crisp air on their cheeks. They could notice their breath as they breathed out. They walked down the footpath, headed down into the woodland, crunching on the ground as they went, walking through that snow, being aware of how incredibly still and silent everything seemed. As they headed into the woodland, they could hear just the faintest sound of the breeze blowing through the trees, noticing the occasional dusting of snow fall from the trees as the wind moved some of the branches and leaves. Before arriving at the lake, and the children walked close to the lake edge. It was a really shallow lake that had really shallow sides. And so near the sides was a layer of ice. And the children enjoyed going over to that edge of the lake, just resting their feet gently on the ice, to the point where they could hear that stretching and then cracking sound of the ice under their feet, and watch the bubbles of air trapped just beneath that ice, moving as the ice flexes, and then watching that ice sink beneath the surface before bouncing up and then floating away from the side and out towards the centre of the lake. And there were some benches by the lake, and so they all went and sat by the benches, and the children started making snowballs and throwing snowballs at each other, and the parents were listening to the sound of the laughter and playing. And then a couple of the adults started building snow people, rolling snow around the ground, creating large snowball, and then creating a smaller snowball and placing it on top. And another couple of the adults decided to build their snow person differently, gathering up that snow, just pushing it all into a pile, making that pile higher and higher, patting around the sides, rubbing down the sides, and then making a snowball for the head, and then finding some sticks, some stones, to do the arms, the nose, the eyes, the mouth. And they tried to get the kids involved in doing the same, but the kids were busy running around, throwing snowballs at each other. And then shortly before they were going to leave the lake, the kids started throwing snowballs towards the snow people, trying to see who could knock the head off a snow person first. And so the adults then joined in with this. And they just played and had fun. And then one of the kids lay down on their back in the snow, made a snow angel in the snow. And as the sun began to set, early in this evening, so they all headed back home. And everyone said it was time for them to head to their own homes. And so everyone left, went back to their own homes, leaving just the parents and the children. And the parents were exhausted and wanted to just sit in front of the TV, relaxing during the evening, having a bit of a rest before having something to eat in the evening. And the children carried on playing with their toys, while the TV was on in the background. And then the children, feeling tired, went off to bed. Not that long after eating their evening meal. And the parents, relaxed, snuggled up on the sofa, and watched a romantic Christmas film, having some time together alone for a while, thinking about how the day has gone, how well it's gone with everyone getting on with each other, the children seeming to enjoy the day, the children being pleased with themselves for noticing Santa delivering the presents the night before. And after the film, the parents went up to bed, and very quickly and easily they drifted and floated comfortably, relaxed, asleep. And as you drift asleep, so I'll just tell this story in the background. Now the kitten had never experienced Christmas before. The kitten was only young. And as Christmas approached, so the kitten would spend its time with the humans, and the humans would be sat on the floor, wrapping presents in paper, then getting some ribbon and wrapping ribbon around the presents. And the kitten just wanted to play with that ribbon. And occasionally, while playing with the ribbon, the kitten would accidentally scratch the paper wrapped around the present. And then the human would snap at them as if they've done something wrong, because they couldn't understand. And the human would then wrap that present again with more paper, more ribbon. And again that kitten would get excited and want to play with that roll of paper, that when they slide on the paper and bash against it, it rolls and makes more paper. And they'd run around and keep bashing against that roll, and then get told off for scratching the paper. And so the kitten, upset with always being told off, tucked itself away in its cat bed, and didn't want to play, and didn't want to spend time with the human, because it didn't want to keep getting told off. And then on Christmas Day, that kitten was wandering around in the living room and could see the humans with their presents, and the kitten tried to keep away from them, worried that it would do something wrong, worried that it would upset them, and it wouldn't even notice what it was that it was doing wrong. And then, as the humans unwrapped these presents, the kitten was wondering why they'd gone to so much effort to wrap the presents if they're just going to rip that paper off of the presents. And the humans saw the kitten, and so they threw some of that wrapping paper towards the kitten, with smiles in their faces. And the kitten backed away. And so the humans threw a bit more wrapping paper towards that kitten. And some of the ribbons. And the kitten was worried and didn't want to go near it, in case it did something wrong. But the humans had smiles on their faces, and were saying something while looking at the wrapping paper and the ribbon, and then at the kitten, and then the wrapping paper and the ribbon. And so eventually the kitten slowly, carefully, reached out with a paw to grab some of the ribbon. And a human then played with that ribbon with the kitten, and the kitten chased that ribbon, grabbed at that ribbon, got it in its claws, and then kicked at it with its rear legs, and then dived into the wrapping paper, pushing through that wrapping paper, catching the balls of wrapping paper, kicking them around. And then could see a box on its side, and the kitten ran and jumped to the box, flipping the box onto its back. As that box slid along the ground with the kitten inside it. And the kitten was feeling more relaxed and comfortable now, being allowed to play with the wrapping paper, with the ribbon, with the boxes, with the humans encouraging it to play. And it felt a bit conflicted, like why was this wrong the other day, and allowed and right today? And the kitten couldn't understand at this point the difference in context, what was different about each situation. The kitten would learn that one day, but for today the kitten was busy playing. And then one of the humans placed what looked like a small present on the floor in front of the kitten, and the kitten smelt that, and could smell something funny inside it, something compelling. And so the kitten bit at that wrapping paper and scratched at that wrapping paper and found what was like a material fish in that wrapping paper. And the smell of this fish was somehow making the kitten more excitable. And so the kitten played with that fish, grabbed at it, kicked at it, knocked it away and then chased it around. And after many hours of playing, the kitten felt tired and decided to go to its bed, where it curled around, relaxed down, and drifted comfortably asleep. And as the kitten drifted comfortably, relaxed asleep, so that kitten began to dream. And it began to dream that it was walking along through a corridor, a little bit like a corridor in its home. It was walking along through that corridor, and at the end of the corridor is a mirror, and that kitten walked all the way to the mirror. And at the mirror, that kitten could begin to see itself walking towards itself. And when it reached the mirror, it noticed the most unusual thing, that its reflection in the mirror looked just like a lion, many, many times larger than the kitten is. And the kitten stepped into that mirror. And as it did, it was almost as if the lion was stepping out of the mirror. And as it did, what it was seeing through the mirror began to change. The kitten began to feel really warm. And once it had stepped through the mirror, it turned around. And back through the mirror, it could see what looked like itself, the other side of the mirror. And then it turned away from the mirror and looked around itself and realized it was in a large, open area, like a savanna. And that kitten walked down to a small lake in this savanna and noticed that lake was so still and calm. And as it reached that lake, so it looked down at itself in the lake and realized it looked like a lion. And the kitten could feel that strength, could feel the size that it was now. And so seeing itself as a lion in that lake wasn't a surprise, but confirmation of its experience. And that kitten spent some time exploring what it was like to be a lion, roaming around on a savanna, before resting up with the rest of its pride and drifting and floating asleep. And as that kitten, as that lion drifted and floated asleep, so it found its mind wandering even deeper into this dream experience. It was back as a kitten again, only this time it was walking through some snow, and the kitten only knew what snow was because it could see it outside the window at home. It had never actually been out in it, and now it had been, it felt so cold. And as that kitten walked along, so it bumped into an elf wearing a green outfit and a green hat with red trim to that hat and red boots. And the elf spoke with the kitten, and the kitten understood the elf, and the elf seemed to understand that kitten. And the elf explained that there's someone who wants to see them. So they followed that elf, walking through the snow, until they arrived at what looked like a small little property, nothing more than a shack. They walked into that shack to discover it as being a vast warehouse just underneath the surface. And in the office they met Santa Claus, and Santa Claus explained why it was that people were snapping at the kitten, and why it was people weren't snapping at the kitten on Christmas Day. And Santa explained that his job is to bring happiness, to deliver gifts to people all over the world. And that gifts get delivered to pets and animals as well as people. And that even animals in woodland, even animals on the savannah, receive gifts. But not everyone wants a brand new bike. Some gifts might be as simple as an item of food or a drink of water. And that it's not about the most expensive gift. It's about the right gift for that person or that animal. And Santa explains that the gift for the kitten was the wrapping paper and the ribbon, that it was bringing that joy on Christmas Day. And the kitten is intrigued by all this, is in awe at meeting Santa Claus. And so, after their experience meeting Santa, they continue to drift deeper and more relaxed to sleep. And the next day they wake up. They see the humans cleaning up. They see the humans. They feel that the house is beginning to look a bit bare, with no presents under a tree anymore. But these humans pay far more attention to the kitten now than they did on Christmas Day, because they don't seem to be so distracted by all those material objects, by the gifts they were receiving. Instead, they're more focused on experiences they're sharing than on presents. And they sit on the floor and play with the kitten, and they stroke its back and get relaxed by its purr, while it relaxes with its back being stroked. And the kitten feels so fortunate to be able to have these humans in its life, that it can help to be happy, and they help that kitten to be happy. And every day that kitten spends time relaxing and then playing with the humans, and then going and drifting and floating and relaxing asleep. Sleeping relaxed and soundly all night long. And this is a story about Leslie. And every year, as Christmas approaches, Leslie feels more lonely than usual. Leslie finds that this time of year, that it seems to really highlight how alone they are. They walk around and they see couples hand in hand walking down the street. They look into restaurants. They see couples laughing with each other in restaurants and cafes. They see friends meeting up in cafes, laughing, having a good time. They see all these people wearing Christmas jumpers and laughing and starting conversations about the different jumpers they're wearing. They see people being invited to work Christmas dues, and everyone seems to be getting on so well, laughing with each other, enjoying the Christmas do. And yet they find that they're always alone, that when they go to a work Christmas do, they feel so anxious, so nervous about blending in, about engaging in conversation, that they sit in a corner, have their hands around a drink, and just stare at that drink, trying not to make eye contact, trying not to draw any attention to themselves. And they desperately wish that they could form some friendships. They're not specifically after having a romantic relationship, but would just like some people in their life and to feel comfortable meeting up with those people, spending time with those people. But they have never seen themselves really as someone able to go out with a group of friends. They're not really confident using social media, or making small talk. And they find that people they know in work want to talk about things that they've got no interest in, and definitely don't want to talk about things that they are interested in. So when it reaches this time of year, when everyone seems to be coming together, they really feel that it emphasizes how alone they actually are. That every day after work, they go home and sit alone. And on days off, they spend them alone. And they smile and they say good morning, good afternoon. They try their best to make polite conversation in work. But they never really feel that they master being able to turn that polite conversation into any kind of meaningful relationship. And as Leslie is walking around, admiring how beautiful the town she lives in looks at this time of year, with Christmas music playing from shops, the smells from Christmas market, the crispness to the air, the crunchiness of snow. And as evening draws in, the way that the lights twinkle and sparkle with decorations, crossing the street, a Christmas tree lit up, people walking around smiling, people being more polite and friendly, and yet they're walking around feeling alone. And they decide to go into a coffee shop. And they sit down in that coffee shop. They get themselves a Christmas hot chocolate. They're not really into Christmas from a religious perspective, but they do like things like Christmas hot chocolates, mince pies, food and drink they don't really get or have access to the rest of the year. They like the way that everything's made to look so friendly and light and jolly, especially at a time of year when before Christmas lights switch on, it can begin to get dark so early in the evenings. It could often be dreary and grey. And then in the middle of winter, in the middle of this dreary and grey period of time, as far as they see it, there's these couple of months of colourful lights, smiling people, and just a general jolliness. And so they sit with a hot chocolate, a Christmas-themed hot chocolate, in the cafe. They sit on their own at the table. They take out a book. They put some headphones in their ears. And they just sit there reading that book, listening to music, and drinking that hot chocolate. ignoring the world around them, absorbed in their own world. And while they're absorbed in their own world, they don't notice how much the coffee shop is filling up. And as that coffee shop is filling up, so eventually someone ends up sitting down next to them because it's the only spare space. And they initially just ignore that person. They carry on reading, listening to the music, and drinking that hot chocolate. But then they notice that person seems to be trying to get their attention. And so they take one of the headphones out their ears. And the person starts talking to them about the book, excitedly saying it's one of their favourite books, and that they've never really seen someone else who reads it. And so Leslie strikes up this conversation back, engaging in a conversation about the book, suddenly feeling a warmth inside that isn't from the hot chocolate, feeling a connection to someone. And because this person struck up the conversation with them, rather than them trying to strike up a conversation with someone else, they didn't have that nervousness, that panicky feeling that they normally get when they think, let's try and strike up a conversation with someone. And as Leslie has nearly finished their hot chocolate, this person asks, do you want another? I'll buy it. And out of politeness, they say yes. And that person goes and gets them a hot chocolate. And they carry on talking, initially about the book, and then realise they have other things in common. And Leslie gets so engrossed in this conversation that they begin to feel some kind of a connection for the first time in a long time. They begin to experience having a relationship with someone, having a friendship with someone. And after they've finished their drinks, this person asks, did they want to just go outside, get some fresh air, take a walk down to the local gardens? And so together they walk through the street in this town. They head down to the local gardens. They find a bench in the local gardens. They sit and talk. They listen to the sounds of birds. They engage in conversation. And Leslie realizes that they really like this person. And they start to feel a bit nervous about whether or not to ask for their number. But then the person seems to have somehow picked up on this and says, I'll give you my number. If you ever want to meet up, just have a chat. Maybe go for a walk, enjoy the countryside. All things Leslie knew that they liked. And so they went home after this meeting with this person. And this was the first time in a very long time that they'd actually met somebody who they felt was on the same wavelength as them, who they felt that they could relate to. And at this time of year, when normally everything around them feels good, but at the same time usually gives them a bit of a bitter taste in their mouth as they become aware of what they're missing. For the first time they feel like they've got a connection with someone else, and that they can build on that connection, spend time with that person, do things together, enjoying their company. That for the first time in a long time, they feel that they can give and receive attention with someone, and that night they go to bed with a feeling of happiness, of hope. And the next day, they agree to meet up with that person again, to continue their conversations that they were having. And they find that they really hit it off as friends. And as they walk around the park again for a second day and sit on a bench in that park, just chatting and chatting, Leslie begins to feel more confident and comfortable with engaging in conversation, and finds that their social anxiety isn't so bad. And the two of them spend time walking by the stream, in this garden, in the park, listening to the babbling water, hearing birds in the trees, talking, sharing their interests. And Leslie feels that they've found a friend for life, even though it's only been a couple of days. It's the first time they've really found this kind of connection. And as Christmas nears, Leslie's been spending a lot of time with this person, and this person has been wanting to also spend that time with them. And they've been round to Leslie's house and had a cup of tea at Leslie's and chatted and looked at Leslie's books. And now Leslie has gone around to their house and they're making a meal for themselves, for Leslie, and for a couple of their friends that they feel Leslie would like, that all think on the same kind of wavelength and share similar interests. And Leslie's a bit nervous about meeting these other new people. But there's something so kind and supportive about this new friend. That makes them feel that they'll hopefully be perfectly fine. And so they have a slight bit of nervousness there when they turn up at the house. But when they're greeted at the door by the soppiest, most loving cat that just wants to climb on their lap and be stroked, and then just sits there purring, relaxing, they instantly find that stroking that cat helps them to relax deeper in the situation. And then as the person's friends arrive, and this person introduces Leslie and introduces the friends to Leslie, the way they do so just makes them feel so valued and helps them to feel like each relationship gets off to a good start. And for the first time in years and years, they find themselves enjoying a social occasion with about half a dozen other people, where these people start conversation and then are willing to be quiet and appear deeply interested and ask questions, to follow up and show engagement and interest in what Leslie has to say, helping Leslie to feel valued and the conversations are all around topics that Leslie finds interesting. They're not around topics that Leslie just wants to escape from. And these people are able to hold conversations in a way that engages Leslie and gets Leslie to be thinking and considering answers and really deeply thinking about the topics, rather than just shallow conversation. And Leslie leaves the evening meal feeling like they'd gained something from that meal, like they'd gained more knowledge and also more curiosity around certain questions, which they can explore. And they really wanted to meet up with these people again, to continue these kinds of conversations. And back at home, Leslie began to contemplate and wonder about their experiences over the last couple of months, about what it was that was different with forming these friendships compared to failing to form any significant friendships in the past. And they thought about the way that these friendships had arisen, that some of the bits that caused them the most anxiety, like trying to socialize, trying to start conversations, trying to remain in conversations that they have no interest in or no knowledge of. None of this was present here. The other person struck up the first conversation with them, and it was about a topic they're interested in. And although they were nervous at first and weren't particularly talkative, the way the person had just been calm, quiet, listening, prompting, putting the focus on how they wanted to hear what Leslie had to say, and that they were deeply interested in what Leslie had to say, all somehow seemed to help. And then meeting the new friends, they weren't the one that walked in to a party full of people they didn't know. They arrived and met with the one person they did know, and were engaging with that person as gradually, one by one, the others turned up. And as the others turned up, Leslie was introduced in a way that made them feel special, made them feel like others would know them just from the introduction. And they thought about how all of this helped to keep their anxiety levels low. And then once they're in the middle of focusing externally, focusing on what others are saying, with deep interest, they didn't have time to be focusing on worrying. Because when they were focusing internally, it was to consider the points that had just been raised. It was to consider new ideas, new learnings, new perspectives around the topics they were talking about. It wasn't to go inside their mind and worry about how they're coming across, or have some other kind of worry. And they didn't do this on purpose. Something about the situation, the level of engagement, the talking about topics they're deeply interested in, made it so that they just happened to do this naturally, instinctively, finding that something about finding the right group of friends really helped them to reduce stress, reduce anxiety, reduce worry. And they knew that they're still not yet in a place where they could just walk into somewhere and try and strike up a conversation and build friendships. They're not in a place where they're comfortable engaging in conversations with work colleagues or being the centre of attention. But they are more comfortable with engaging in conversations with this new circle of friends. And as they think about how this will make the future go different, they go to bed and relax down, feeling these pleasant thoughts and ideas, and they drift and float comfortably and relaxed, asleep. Now most of the year, Santa drops into a hibernation. And then on about the 22nd of December, he comes out of hibernation and starts to prepare for Christmas. And you may be thinking that that's a bit late for him to prepare for Christmas. But Santa has a few tricks up his sleeve. See, Santa is really a man who 300 years ago developed the ability to control time. And what he found was that he could pause time, he could speed time up, he could slow time down. So when he enters hibernation, he goes into a kind of stasis where he doesn't age. He then comes out of hibernation a few days before Christmas, does what he's got to do, and then on Boxing Day, he goes back to bed again, re-enters hibernation, and drifts off to sleep for almost an entire year. And so when Santa exits hibernation, the elves have found the letters from children, from people all over the world, asking for what they want. And the elves have been gathering all of the presents over the month before Christmas. And some people get their lists in late. So the elves work right up to the last minute to gather presents. And all Santa has to do is review the list of presents and check that everything has been bought that's required. So he goes through the entire list, and to be able to have enough time to leisurely do that, he pauses time. He has a room on the North Pole where he can pause time and take all the time he needs to read the list. And so with time paused, he reads that list, checks that all the items are purchased, and starts loading them onto his sleigh. And every couple of years, Santa has to rebuild a whole new sleigh to accommodate the increase in people he has to deliver to. And his sleigh is much like the TARDIS, in that it looks a normal size, yet inside the storage compartment it's huge. And that's an advantage of Santa mastering space and time, that he's been able to use alternative dimensions to make normal space larger than it really is. And then once his sleigh is loaded, his sleigh has another secret. His sleigh can totally stop time while still being able to physically travel itself. So as soon as the time comes and the clock in Santa's office strikes time, Santa starts delivering his presents. He freezes real-world time and takes all the time he needs to deliver presents from the top of the earth down to the bottom of the earth within that one time zone. And then when he reaches the North Pole again, he starts time, does his checks, makes sure that all presents were delivered, makes sure that everything's ready for his next run through. And then an hour later, he freezes time again. And again he travels down from the North Pole, all the way around the earth, from top to bottom and back up again, within the next time zone. Delivering all the presents that he needs to. And then when he reaches the North Pole again, he unfreezes time,
goes through his checks, makes sure he's definitely delivered everything he's supposed to, checks what he's got to deliver on his next round, makes sure that they're all the things that are on top. And then on the next hour, he freezes time again and delivers all the presents again, from the North Pole, all the way round the Earth, from the top down to the bottom, within that time zone, and then all the way back up the other side, back to the North Pole again. And Santa does this all night long, making multiple journeys, delivering presents to everyone that needs presents around the Earth. And just to deliver these presents in this way takes Santa the equivalent of 6 months' worth of hours of working. Because although it seems instant to the people he delivers to Santa he has to travel in his sleigh. He has to arrive at every single house, every single flat. He has to find his way in. He has to place the correct presents. He stops for food breaks from time to time, mainly eating mince pies and having some drink of milk. He never touches brandy when that's left out, because he won't drink and drive. He has to then get out of that person's house, get back to his sleigh, move on to the next person's house. And he has to do that across the entire world. And although he's got a grasp of time and space, to Santa it still takes him about 6 months, even though in real world time only one night passes around the world. And so by the time Christmas Day is over, Santa's exhausted and looking forward to his hibernation. And just before Christmas Day is over, he pauses time, he does one last check, checking he's definitely delivered everything he should, checking in with the elves, making sure that they're okay and they're aware what they need to do across the next year. And checking a few other bits and pieces, odd jobs, tasks that just need to be done, even by Santa. Before then going and drifting back into a hibernation. And then while Santa is in hibernation, the elves take care of his place. They keep it clean and tidy. And as the next Christmas approaches, they get all the lists, they go to the shops, they make all the relevant purchases. And you may wonder how Santa can afford to buy everyone in the entire world gifts every year. The advantage of mastering space and time is that Santa was able to invest well hundreds of years ago. And money he invested then increases year on year. And when you're over 300 years old, even what seemed like small amounts of money can turn into huge amounts of money. And the elves have the ability that they can take on human form, or at least as far as humans see it. So they're able to travel the world, gathering up presents through the year, ready for when their boss comes out of hibernation next. And while Santa drifts into hibernation, it's a bit like falling asleep. And Santa drifts off to sleep, and while he sleeps, he dreams. And his body rests and recuperates. And as his body rests and recuperates and he sleeps and dreams, he starts to drift off and wonder about lives he's led, about what he used to do hundreds of years ago, about what he gave up when he decided to take on this role of Santa. Before being Santa, he was just an ordinary inventor, kept himself to himself, just inventing things that interested him. But once he invented a way to control space and time, he knew that he had to be careful not to affect the lives of others, not to mess with the continuum. That if he started using it to change things, there could be unforeseen circumstances. And that even when you try and change time for the better, normally something doesn't work out so good for someone. And each time you try to correct something, because of the butterfly effect, the outcome you get is always unpredictable, the further away from that point you get. So he wanted to make people feel good. He wanted to help. He didn't want his technology, his invention, to end up in the wrong hands. So he moved away. He paused time, giving himself plenty of time to get to the North Pole. Giving himself plenty of time to build at the North Pole. And he decided that he would use his technology to benefit people, to give people things that they want, things that will make their lives better, things that will make people smile. And while Santa sleeps, he regenerates and de-ages. Because Santa sleeps in a time capsule that to anyone else would just look like a normal bed. But while he's asleep in this normal bed, in his hibernation, it stimulates his cells to rejuvenate, to heal themselves, undoing all the damage that perhaps has been done through his time outside of hibernation. And this has helped him to maintain his appearance, to maintain the same age that he was when he developed his invention. And he doesn't want this getting in the wrong hands either. He's aware over the 300 years how population has expanded and grown without an invention that can significantly prolong life like his. He's aware what would happen to the population if his invention got out and everyone was using it. And every Christmas, Santa awakens from his hibernation for just a few days to bring joy to the people of the world, to bring something good, have something that brings people together, makes people smile, makes people unite. Makes people feel valued. Makes people feel like at least someone is thinking of them. And Santa likes to think that he spreads his presence in the present with his presence. And as Santa freezes time, there are times people have caught a glimpse of him, but they don't really notice. They have almost like a subliminal memory that they saw him. Almost like they saw him out the corner of their eye. If there's a child in a room and Santa appears, it's a bit like Santa being on a single frame on an entire movie. And as the movie plays, you may think you saw something just flash on the screen for a moment, but it's so brief you can't be certain, and you never get a chance to see it again. And so Santa being present in someone's house, walking around, people frozen still, taking his time in the house to place the presents correctly, to hang stockings. People have almost like a subliminal scene in their mind where Santa is almost just like a fuzzy image, almost like a red blur, like a long exposure, light image, where Santa is in all the places that he was, all within that moment. And with all that hard work, Santa enjoys his sleep. Finds it really easy after all that hard work to drift off to sleep, to hibernate, only coming out at Christmas, to transform lives. And as Santa drifts into hibernation, relaxes, so you can fall asleep and sleep soundly and comfortably and relax. And there was a snowman, a young boy, had spent hours in his back garden, initially rolling a small snowball around the garden. And then after a little while, the snowball was large enough for him to roll it around with 2 hands. And his hands were freezing cold, and the snow was sticking in clumps to his gloves, and it was making his hands go numb. But he was enjoying rolling that snowball around his garden. And the snowball started to get larger and larger, where he had to put a lot of effort into continuing to roll that snowball around the garden. And for some parts of the garden where the snowball was rolling, it was now picking up all the snow, exposing the green, flat grass underneath. And it was cold, and he could feel the cold on his cheeks, as his face was slightly numb. And that snowball was really solid, as he rolled it into position, ready to be the snowman's body. And he hit it with his hands, and he rubbed it with his gloves to try and smooth it down, to try and give it some snowman shape. You could hear the thud and the slap of his hands on that snow. And then he got another small handful of snow, and he started rolling that around in the garden. And he rolled that around until it was large enough to require 2 hands to roll around. Then he pushed it around in different directions to make the snow as round on that snowman's face as he could. And then once that snowball was about the size of a snowman's head, he picked it up and placed it on top of the larger snowball. He then, while he held it with one hand, reached down with the other hand and scraped snow up the lower snowball to the neck area and patted it around, and then got some extra snow from the ground and started patting that around the neck, patting it around, smoothing it out, connecting the large snowball to the smaller snowball. And he could feel the snow from time to time as occasionally the snow fell, and the snowflakes would tickle his nose. And sometimes the snow would be heavy, and other times just a little flutter. And there was that sound of the footsteps on the snow, and on the sloshy grass where the snow once was. And that stillness in the air, where everything just seemed so quiet and so peaceful this time of year when it's been snowing.
And the boy went and wandered around, trying to find some small stones that he could use for eyes. He had a little hunt around, and as he hunted around, he'd just feel tempted from time to time to put his hand down into untouched snow on top of the bin lid, on windowsills and ledges and tabletops, and over in the corner of his garden was an upturned bin lid that was full of water, and usually that upturned bin lid full of water was a bird bath. But because of it being so cold, water had frozen solid. And when he knocked that bird bath, he could see the water sloshing slightly underneath the surface ice. And so he got his hand and carefully applied pressure to the top of the ice. He could feel that smooth coldness under his fingertips as he stroked that ice and applied a bit more pressure. And he could hear the cracking beginning as the ice was starting to give. Before it suddenly broke under the weight of his hand, and his fingers got wet and soaked in the water, and his hand was freezing cold. But being a child out in the snow, he didn't mind. He enjoyed the snow and this season. It wasn't something he experienced very often. And he picked up some of the broken ice and just took a moment to enjoy handling that ice, the feeling of the ice, how incredibly smooth the ice is, how fresh the ice smells. And he found some small stones which he went and used his thumb to mark out holes for the eyes in the snowman, and placed the stones within the holes. Then he used his finger to draw a mouth on the snowman. And he then went looking to try and think, what could he find for the nose? And he hunted around, and he didn't have any carrots, which is what everyone seems to choose. So he hunted around to see what he could find. And after some hunting and some searching, he found a broken piece of red brick and decided that that would make a slightly different nose. So he used the red brick for nose. And for the mouth, he just got a little bit of mud and put a little bit of mud into the groove he'd made for the mouth. And he thought it would be fun to get loads of pine needles, a load of pine leaves from the tree nearby, And so he picked them off, and he started placing them individually, very carefully, very patiently, into the snowman's head, creating a whole head of green hair. And the snowman had its green hair. It was a bit taller than the boy. It had its red brick nose, its dark stone eyes, and its brown muddy mouth. And the boy was pleased with his snowman. He'd worked on his own in the garden making this snowman. And when the boy went to bed that night, the snowman woke up, and the snowman gained some consciousness. And this wasn't the first time that the snowman had gained consciousness. The snowman may just be made out of water. But when it takes the shape and the form of a being, it develops the characteristics of a being. And the snowman went to the bird bath and looked in the water to see what he looked like. How had he been made this year? He knew that in this form he would only exist for a few days before turning back into water. And that wouldn't be the end of the snowman. He would turn back into water. He'd travel around the world in rivers, streams, lakes, oceans. He would travel through people, through animals. And eventually, he would get built back into another snowman. And the snowman went exploring and met up with other snow people. And they enjoyed their freedom. They enjoyed this relationship that they have with children, where the children use their imaginations to build them up and turn them into living beings. And for a few nights, they get to meet up with each other, they get to experience life and existence. And they think to themselves about how, if it wasn't for the children, if no one was making snow people, none of them would exist. And if none of them existed, there would just be solid water on the ground, or icicles, or ice, or water in rivers and streams and lakes and oceans, but never being shaped into being a being, never being given the opportunity for life. The opportunity to bring pleasure and joy to others, to play a role in the lives of others in quite the same way. And in the morning, the boy comes out of his house and he takes a photo of himself with his arm around his snowman. And he's got this cheeky, wide grin, touching the tip of his forehead, the tip of his temple, to the head of the snowman. He doesn't mind that it makes his head slightly cold, because he gets to have a selfie with the snowman. And then, as the days pass, the snowman gradually melts, and it gets smaller and smaller and wider across the ground. And the water begins to evaporate up into the sky, and the snowman continues his journey for another year, knowing that in about a year's time he'll be back to be turned into a snowman again, to bring joy to children, and to experience the world as a being. As the snowman melts, so you can drift comfortably and relax asleep. And one Christmas, Santa was working hard, as he had been all year round, making the toys for the children. And toys have become more complex nowadays. Just 150 years ago or so, all the toys that the elves and that Santa had to make were made of wood, and were simple toys. Now the toys are made of metals and other compounds, and they're complicated toys. And there's also more people. So Santa's workload has significantly increased, and he struggles to get all the work done in time. Not only does he have to get all this extra work done in time, but overnight on Christmas, he has to deliver billions more presents than he ever used to have to deliver. And he can only go so fast. And he has to find new ways into houses, because many of the houses no longer have chimneys. So he can no longer just land on a roof, pop down the chimney, leave a few presents, eat a mince pie, drink a bit of milk and pop back up the chimney again. Now he has to find creative ways in, to houses and to flats. And luckily for Santa, he has a helpful elf. An elf who's intelligent, who finds shortcuts, who finds ways of doing things that others don't think of. This elf seems to be able to think outside of the box, seems to be able to find ways of solving problems that others just don't think of. And Santa has a problem with trying to fit everything on his sleigh. His sleigh starts off very packed as he starts his journey. And then as he travels around the world, dropping off presents, his sleigh becomes emptier and emptier. But it's very difficult to do the beginning of the journey when the sleigh is so full. And so Santa turns to the helpful elf to try to find a solution. And the helpful elf has been working on a solution for the whole year, while all the other elves have been working on the presents that Santa is going to have to deliver. The helpful elf has been working on something else. And now, on Christmas Eve, the helpful elf reveals what he's been working on. The helpful elf has made millions of drones. And each drone can carry a small bundle of presents. And so each drone gets loaded up with a bundle of presents, while Santa's sleigh gets loaded up with the majority of the presents. But the presents that each drone is loaded up with is just enough to mean that Santa can deliver everything on time. And this invention that the elf has designed has the drone able to arrive at houses, navigate its way in, drop off the presents by the tree, and navigate its way out again. It's totally automated. And so requires no additional attention. And yet it allows Santa to make all the other deliveries on time. And the helpful elf has had to program in each and every address for each and every drone. And when it's about to be midnight in the first location in the world, Santa takes off in his sleigh, and all the drones lift up and take off. Santa's so quick he vanishes almost in an instant. as he starts delivering to the first addresses and the nearby addresses. The first drones shoot off and start making their deliveries, and the other drones start their journey, so that as midnight approaches around the world, the drones arrive and start delivering their presents. And at the end of the Christmas night, when all the presents are delivered, Santa and the drones end up back at the North Pole. And Santa thanks the helpful elf for his work, for his ingenuity, for his invention, which saves Christmas. And Santa wonders what people are missing as they grow up and start to forget about the wonder of Christmas, as they grow up and stop believing, because he doesn't deliver to non-believers, only to those that believe. And although he tries to deliver to those that believe while they're asleep, sometimes one or two of the people will be awake and will try to catch Santa out and try to see Santa. And he wonders what it must be like for those who try to catch him out if a drone arrives instead of Santa. Whether they'll judge him as perhaps not caring as much as he used to, because he wasn't the one delivering their presents. And then as Christmas comes to an end, the helpful elf and all the other elves go back to their beds to settle down for a long sleep. And Santa, now exhausted, goes back to Mrs. Claus, where they too settle down for a long sleep, as you too can settle down for a long and comfortable sleep.